Hello everyone, I am Sahil Madan from Group 6 here to present a case study on the research paper Reducing Poverty in the Least Developed Countries, the Role of Small and Medium Enterprises, authored by Vladislav Maximov, Stephanie Lu Wang, and Yudong Lu. Before we take a deep dive into the paper, let us first understand the LDCs. As defined by United Nations, the least developed countries are low-income countries confronting severe structural impediments to sustainable development. They are highly vulnerable to economic and environmental shocks and have low levels of human assets. When we talk about LDCs, we refer to countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, Liberia, among many others. The United Nations in 2014 classified 48 countries as least developed countries. These are the poorest, most vulnerable and weakest countries where on an average 50.8% of the population lives on less than $1.25 a day and 72.5% lives less than $2 per day. We can clearly gauge the daily struggles of people here is survival and earning of a mere livelihood. It is worth noting that major sources of income of most people living in these countries are self-employment or selling labor. This is where the authors introduce the role of businesses in alleviating poverty in these countries. While the need for poverty alleviation stands to be a global socio-economic concern, but the role of businesses is really important because they sell to, employ, and can be farmed by people residing in these poor nations. The authors add to this that poor need not only steady income but a reasonable wage that puts them above the poverty line. As per a World Bank's report, Voices of the Poor, 60,000 poor people unequivocally stated that increasing income from their own business or wages earned in the employment was most successful in escaping from poverty. Going a step further, although the role of home governments and large businesses cannot be denied, but major role in the battling of developing the LDCs is to be played by the small and medium enterprises. These tend to be small and have a mixture of self-employment and micro-enterprises with less than 10 employees. These small businesses are on the front line because they interact with the people, hire people who are at the base of the pyramid, who are the poorest of the poor. The paper believes that payment of higher wages by these SMEs is an important step towards poverty alleviation in these LDCs, and that higher wages can be achieved by increasing the efficiency of acquiring and utilizing inputs and by maximizing the output from the given inputs and thereby increasing the organizational efficiency. Also, by paying higher wages, the SMEs can get competitive advantage in largely unskilled, illiterate and abundantly market. Let's understand this more in detail in the theories proposed by the authors. First one, SMEs and poverty elevation in LDCs and the challenges faced by SMEs in LDCs. As discussed above, this theory enunciates that increase in SMEs efficiency could translate into higher employee wages or household income of the owners who are often poor as well. For example, it was found that 70% of the enterprise owners of micro and small medium industries in Kenya earn less than the poverty line. And we are talking about owners here. The paper also mentions other challenges faced by SMEs as part of this theory. One of the many problems which is commonly faced by many enterprises all across the globe are problems like limited access to capital and technology, lack of economic scope, poor management skills, lack of training opportunities amongst many others. Then to top all of this, there is an additional burden of underdeveloped market institutions around them. Another research presented by the paper points that a large number of small enterprises are run by self-employed entrepreneurs, which typically operate in extreme, labor-intensive environment, and they tend to extract maximum use from their minimum resources, thereby exploiting the labor employed. In other research presented from 2012, it was found that 25 to 45% of SMEs use their owner's home as a primary location for operation in 9 of the sub-Saharan African countries, and other 10 to 40% simply work on the streets. The next theory talks about institutional constraints and enablers in LDC. For any market or economy, rules, regulations, legislation, and other mechanisms form the formal institutional framework. The framework can act as an enabler to SMEs or to general development of LDCs or can become a constraint as well. On the other hand, informal frameworks such as the social norms, values, cultures and practices are also needed to support market participation and a resource allocation for development of LDCs through SMEs. As much as we talk about the importance of formal and informal institutional framework in any LDC economy, it is often seen that LDCs are characterized with an extremely underdeveloped formal institutional frameworks and mostly compromised informal framework which tends to be exploited and misused by corporations, especially from developed nations in the sham of developing these LDCs. We have discussed many examples like these in our class when we talked about the examples of Nike or Apple doing the such same things. This theory also suggests that when the detrimental effects of such institutions impact the economic growth and public welfare, government and multiple foreign and international institutions initiate policies and programs to promote economic and social development as well as reduce poverty in the base of the pyramid communities. These institutional constraints exist in the form of weak legislations, lack of clear regulations, weak regulatory, and other bodies. These sometimes lead to increase in transaction cost for enterprises due to lack of legal regimes. For example, increases in expenses due to property rights protection or contract laws can increase the operational cost due to the lack of trust in the formal institution. Another form of constraint formed by formal institution is experienced by SMEs when they practically become a part of the poverty traps or the debt traps when the local government agencies often implement policies that favor the large corporations. The authors conclude the theory by iterating that institutional environment in the LDCs is in a transition as governments are continuously working to improve these institutions, and they also say that in comparison to developed nations these may seem ill-designed, but over time they have the potential to produce desired results. Examples of such programs are setting up of special economic zones and export incentive programs can be really promising as these institutional changes have shown positive changes and results in developing nations like India. Coming to the last of the theories, institutional and organizational efficiency and higher wages. As we discussed earlier, a necessary condition for firms to pay higher wages is the achievement of greater efficiency, particularly with respect to improvement in productivity. So in order to successfully operate with organizational efficiencies, SMEs either have to overcome institutional constraints successfully or identify opportunities to leverage available institutional support. Based on the existing literature, one is the development of relationships between government authorities as a source of regulatory and discretionary power, and other is the reliance on informal interactions, building personal relationships with the managers in other businesses or other stakeholders to conduct their business. For SMEs that are able to do this and are able to maintain organizational efficiencies and pay high wages, it becomes really key to secure a reliable workforce through high wages in order to safeguard continuously efficient gains. It is really effective to minimize this cost by retaining a sufficiently qualified and reliable workforce through higher wages. In essence, the authors present a mediation model, which we'll learn about more in detail later on, where organizational efficiency mediates the positive effects on the employee wages of three approaches to overcome institutional constraints or take advantage of the institutional enablers. Now I will pass this presentation on to Vidhant to discuss the hypotheses for this research paper and see the results later on.
Hypothesis. Hypothesis 1. In LDCs, SMEs that have contracts with the local government achieve higher organizational efficiency. One approach to overcome local institutional constraints is to look for an external source of power and resources, such as the government. Governments in all emerging economies, including LDCs, are important institutional and economic actors because they control substantial strategic factor resources, initiate and approve projects, designate subcontractors, and allocate resources in the economy and among businesses. They often provide support to businesses in an attempt to offset or substitute underdeveloped or missing market supporting institutions. Contracting with government in LDCs begets the following advantages for a business in brief. A. Helps reduce transaction costs and operational risks. B. Helps SMEs gain access to critical resources such as information, technologies, and financing. C. Cost of inputs may be reduced as a result of favorable taxation or legislation, subsidies, or preferential treatment. D. Gaining contracts with the local government also enables SMEs to gain favorable access to more accurate, sometimes unpublished information and benefit from fewer bureaucratic delays. This kind of advanced information would enable an SME to prepare ahead for changes in government regulations and also take advantages of such opportunities that may arise as a result of such changes, and be prepared for any additional regulatory burdens these changes may impose. E. In addition, securing a government contract is a means to increase the scale operation and thereby productivity. F. Securing a government contract allows SMEs to maintain a steady flow of operations and exploit scale economies. And lastly, efficiency may also increase because SMEs can economize on marketing costs, including search, reach, and development of a customer base. By seeking government contracts, an SME may be in a position to internalize the inefficient institutions as suggested and seek to increase its organizational efficiency by ways of above mentioned advantages. Hypothesis 2. In LDCs, SMEs with higher export to foreign markets achieve higher organizational efficiency. Despite prevailing institutional constraints in LDCs, SMEs can improve efficiency by taking advantage of institutional incentives to stimulate economic growth. A major component of such incentives is export promotion, because higher exports are commonly associated with higher economic growth among developing countries. Export promotion is usually a part of a larger structural reform in developing countries and often goes along with trade liberalization, incentives to attract FDI, providing tax incentives for exporting businesses, and entering international trade agreements. Evidence from a variety of developing countries suggests that such programs have a positive effect on exports of SMEs. Exports may lead to increase in efficiencies in a number of ways. A. Exporting firms are often more productive than non-exporting firms because of direct spillover effects from foreign firms in the home country. B. Through exporting to foreign markets, SMEs from LDCs can learn to develop market-based strategies. C. Exporting helps SMEs enter international networks where they can access and acquire valuable information and knowledge. D. Exporting SMEs in LDCs often complement these international networks with domestic networks to address export marketing problems. E. Exporting allows SMEs to gain external finance which helps them overcome growth constraints and become more efficient. F. Furthermore, exporting SMEs can take advantage of additional incentives and opportunities allowed by various non-government, non-profit and social organizations, as well as by international organizations and agencies. And lastly, they can seek international certifications, low-cost financing, development grants, information about customers, suppliers, and foreign markets, access to various resources, or even direct access to markets. Keeping in mind the above benefits which can accrue to SMEs due to export, it can be evidently stated that despite severe institutional constraints, Exporting SMEs in LDCs are likely to enjoy greater efficiency due to various incentives and opportunities afforded by existing institutional enablers. Hypothesis 3. In LDCs, SMEs with female ownership achieve higher. Another route for SMEs is to rely on informal institutions, primarily relationship based. In order to internalize formal institutional constraints, the unique approach identified in women owned businesses are particularly suitable to ingest institutional constraints and achieve organizational efficiency. Women in LDCs face constraints not only from underdeveloped formal institutions but also from legacy institutions, which play a major role in restricting their access to information and other resources, thereby increasing transaction costs from contracting or owning and operating a business compared to men, as a result of which the approach of women to business is likely to rely not only on informal personal relationships but also the use of institutions specifically established to target gender inequality in LDCs. Some distinct features of female ownership have been identified by many researchers, which have been considered for the third hypothesis. These features are: A. Women owner managers tend to rely extensively on cooperating networks to build relationships and achieve their business goals. B. By following such a network based and integrated approach, they see their businesses as an extension of their lives, where personal, family, social, and business relationships are integrated into a whole. C. Personal networks and strong ties allow them to at least partially substitute personal network relations for formal contracts. D. Women-owned businesses exhibit a deeper organizational commitment to employees and extensive connections with outside stakeholders. E. Women-owned businesses often achieve greater adaptation and resilience to underdeveloped factors and product markets in developing economies. F. Women owner managers in LDCs are responsible, frugal, and flexible in utilizing resources and managing risks. G. They often innovate ways to counter external constraints such as unequal access to capital or normative judgments and expectations of the role of women in society. H. Women owner managers emphasize sustainability and stability of the business through harmony within the network among employees, suppliers, customers, and other stakeholders. And finally, women-owned businesses are more likely to unlock low-status labor's potential to enhance organizational efficiency. Whoa, feminism, right? All these features, speculative women-owned businesses and women entrepreneurs, have been studied and identified by many researchers, and all these features make a strong case for the formation of the third hypothesis mentioned above as a part of strategy for poverty alleviation in LDCs. Hypothesis 4. For SMEs in LDCs, organizational efficiency mediates the positive relationships between contracts with the local government, higher exports to foreign markets, and female ownership and higher employee wages. Organizational efficiencies as a mediator to higher employer wages. Above, we have stated that contracting with the local government, exporting to foreign markets, and having female ownership enable SMEs in LDCs to improve organizational efficiency. Now we focus on the fourth construct of relationship between organizational efficiency and employee wages. To begin with, achieving efficiency is a necessary condition for SMEs to pay higher employee wages in LDCs. Prior research has found that efficient firms have higher cost advantages and thus have a greater ability to pay. Higher productivity enables firms to produce more outputs with limited production capacity. The achieved overall organizational efficiency thus provides firms with income to create jobs that pay higher wages. In LDCs, labor force is often unorganized, poorly skilled, highly immobile, and in demand. An organization which wants to improve productivity and efficiency has to ensure that it has a constant and regular supply of trained workers who are loyal to the organization and who are able to give higher output than the regular stream of unskilled workers. This alone can help the organization raise its level of productivity above the industry standards and afford to operate on a lower efficient resource utilization basis with higher efficiencies of operating ability. In order to retain a loyal, high performing workforce, the SME has to pay higher wages to its employees to maintain the competitiveness of its business. In LDCs, higher employee wages can also retain such workers by helping them improve the quality of their lives and overcome the everyday hurdles to regular employment they may face. Therefore, higher wages are not only an outcome of efficiency but also a mechanism to maintain it in future. Similarly, based on the above three hypotheses, it can be stated that as far as contracting with the local government is concerned, SMEs contracting with the local government, increasing employee wages can help ensure contract completion and improve chances to obtain future contracts. 2. For SMEs participating more extensively in export markets, higher wages may help warrant the needed expertise and effort in attaining product quality required by foreign marketers, as well as exploit opportunities to expand foreign markets. 3. For female-owned businesses, increasing compensation serves not only to retain a reliable workforce and continue to exploit efficiency, but also to achieve reciprocity and harmony in relationships. Wow, I fudged that up, but never mind. The conceptual model given below puts the entire picture in diagrammative perspective. Now I will pass on the presentation to Chinedu. Thank you so much for listening.
So I'll be speaking on the methodology. Single manufacturing firms employing between 5 and 550 employees were selected for the study, and a total of 1,273 observations were obtained, evenly distributed among 7 countries, 4 from Africa, 2 from Asia, and 1 from the Middle East. Employee wages is measured by dividing the total labor expense by the total number of employees for the latest fiscal year of each firm. Capacity utilization is the percentage of the manufacturing capacity utilized during the latest fiscal year and ranges between 8% and 100%, with close to 19% of the firms utilizing 50% or less. Working capital leverage reveals the proportion of a firm's working capital over the latest fiscal year that was financed through the external sources such as banks, non-bank financial institutions, purchases on credit from suppliers, advances from customers and money lenders, friends or relatives, as opposed to financing it through internal funds and retained earnings, with a mean rating of 0.22, standard deviation of 0.25, and a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 1. It captures the efficiency of each firm in managing several external financial relationships and coordinating them with internal operations. Overdraft asset reveals strong interpersonal ties with local business network, especially in the case of female-owned firm, and is represented as a domain variable that assumes the value of 1 when the firm has access to overdraft facility and 0 otherwise. 243 firms have permission to overdraft assets, while 1,030 do not, 48 have a government contract, 89 have a female ownership, and 52 have some foreign sales. Control variables such as the national log transformation of gross domestic product per capita with a lag of 1 year is used to account for the variation in domestic market size. Human Development Index (HDI) and Gender Development Index were also incorporated to control social disparities across the 7 countries. Adoption of OLS regression analysis to examine the hypothesized mediating effects alongside bootstrapping techniques to complement the mediation analysis. The purchasing power of wages across countries is obtained by subtracting the mean from the variable per country and dividing by the standard deviation of the employees' wages for each country. The difference in purchasing power is obtained by dividing the purchasing power of wages across countries by the national price level, which is equal to the ratio between the PPP conversion factor and the market exchange rate. The national price levels are Pakistan is 0.34, Mali is 0.44, Mozambique is 0.53, Nepal is 0.29, Senegal is 0.46, Yemen is 0.42, Zambia is 0.43. Government contract indicates that when a government contract is secured is 1, otherwise 0. Female ownership, when the firm has a female owner, otherwise is 0. Export sales, proportion of sales is latest fiscal year generated through the direct or indirect export. You have seen the government contract, export, female ownership, that leads to organization efficiency, to employee wages. So I'm talking on discussion. Priority is given to the crossing the poverty line amidst all efforts to enhance national development in poor nations with a view of the poor as producers who could rise above poverty by receiving greater income. Naturally, successful response to the institutional environment is a necessary condition for both employment generation and higher wages. Studies reveals that female ownership is associated with weaker growth compared to male ownership. However, vital relationships to wages indicate specific conditions could favor decent employment and not compulsory growth. Microfinance helps people to start up small business and earn greater income. Least developed countries tends to align with foreign firms or form a geographical cluster depending on the institutional constraint that the firm belongs to. Another analysis shows that women own small market enterprises add unique value to the communities where they are established, and this corresponds to a normal distribution less than 0.01. Woman-owned SMEs reflect a specific set of managerial and organizational approaches which deserve greater support in the form of training, education, technology, and information, and assistance with reaching customers and suppliers. Direct contact with foreign experience and know-how through ownership, partnership, or development of community-based strategies can be beneficial to those business and support apart from government assistance. So speaking on the impact on Canada. Poverty reduction in Canada is linked to an increase in employment and a reduction in vulnerable employment. In order to escape from poverty, the poor need a productive jobs that lead to higher income. About 40% of SMEs in Canada believe that with their current cash flow, they can maintain operations for more than 6 months. Small business owners are under a great deal of pressure to access cash flow quickly so they can ultimately reignite growth with higher education resulting to better employment opportunities, which supports incremental success. Canadian food industry is recognized worldwide for the highest standard of quality and food safety, responsible for 1 in 8 jobs across the country, which represent the powerhouse of the Canadian economy, especially in the rural areas. So the conclusion. In the examination of 1,273 manufacturing SMEs across 7 least developed countries in Africa, Asia, and Middle East, with the view of the poor as the producers, and that poverty can not only be alleviated by creating employment opportunities, but also by providing decent income. It has been established that SMEs who can secure government contracts, export to foreign market, or have female ownership have a higher probability of achieving greater efficiency and pay higher wages to the employees, which will in turn reduce poverty in the country. Thank you, Prof.